Hey, what's up guys? Today we're going to show you how to set up your suspension. In part one of the suspension series, we did a really cool test where we had April go through a rock garden a few times, and one time we had her bike too soft and too slow. One time we set up her bike too stiff and too fast. And then we set her bike to a really good baseline setting, and you could tell a huge difference in not only her composure, but how much traction she had. And she hit that section so much better just by making a few little changes to her bike.
Yeah, it felt way better.
And we're actually gonna see if she can kind of get back to that same ballpark today on her own. I will walk through that process with April and try to answer any questions that come up as we go. So with that being said, we're gonna go grab April, we're gonna reset her bike and start this whole setup process. All right, so we got April and we got her bike, and we are gonna do this whole reset and setup process. The process we're gonna follow today is pretty simple actually. It's just called SSRC. So we're gonna check our sag first, then we'll adjust our spring rate, and then we're gonna set our rebound and compression. So because April has air suspension, we're gonna need a shock pump, and we're also gonna need a tape measure with millimeters, preferably, just because that's a little bit more accurate. A lot of the things we're gonna go over today will get you in a really good ballpark. I do recommend always checking with your manufacturer first, of either your suspension manufacturer and or your frame manufacturer, to see what settings they recommend for your bike, because some bikes are pretty particular, but you can follow this setup and get to a good ballpark of like 30% front rate. So one of the very first things that I see come up for confusion point is, how do you measure your sag? Do you do it with your seat up in your climbing position? Do you do it standing in your downhill position? Or do you do it kind of in the middle? A good rule of thumb to follow is that you want to measure your sag in the position you're going to be in the most often. So if you're a cross-country rider and you're going to spend most of the time seated pedaling and climbing up some trails, then I would recommend setting it up with your seat at full extension height. If you're more of a trail rider, then what I like to do is set up my bike with the seat down. And the reason is that as the seat extends, it puts you further over the back of the bike. When you have your seat down, it kind of centers you in the bike. So if you do it in the middle of the bike, then it kind of creates a good balance point between climbing and descending. And then if you're a downhiller and you have a downhill bike, you want to set it up, then you're going to do it in your full kind of attack position where you're standing on the bike, more forward on the bike. That being said, now that there's very little air pressure in her fork and rear shock, a lot of times on most bikes, a good ballpark setting is about your body weight in the rear shock. Okay. So if you weigh 140 pounds, then you're gonna set 140 PSI. And on the fork, we're gonna do half body weight. So if you're 180 pounds, then you'll do 90 in the fork, 180 in the rear, and that should get you kind of ballpark, and then we can start adjusting from there.
Okay, it's at 22, so I have a lot to go.
So you got it up to body weight pretty much?
Yeah, I have it at 130.
Oh, you broke the golden rule.
I know, but it's helpful.
Okay, okay, okay. Let's go ahead and just get the fork as well. Okay. All right, so now that we got April's bike set up to a good ballpark for the spring rate, we're gonna go ahead and start checking the sag and try to get it set exactly right. So if you have a full suspension bike, I always just like to start with the rear shock first, just because it is a little bit easier than doing the fork, but we will show you a really cool way to measure the fork that also works on a hardtail or full suspension bike. So before we do anything, we just need to figure out how much stroke our shock has, and what the stroke is how much the shock actually moves. So on the back of this shock, there's a little sticker and it says 55 millimeters of stroke. So we're gonna take that 55 millimeters, we're gonna multiply it by 0.3 to get 30% sag. So when April compresses her bike, we're gonna measure from the bottom of the shock where the seal is to the O-ring and try to get 16.5 millimeters. So if you're trying to measure your sag in the full cross-country mode because you're more of a pedaler, then you might need someone to help hold you, because I'll show you with April, but when she has her seat all the way up, it's kind of hard to unweight, you know? So she's gonna bounce a few times in this position and then can slide the O-ring up. And then what I like to do is hold the front brake, pull her forward, and then she can get off the bike. So that's a really good way to do it when you're measuring it for like cross-country. And then when you're doing it for downhill, same thing, we can show them that too. Cycle a few times. Okay, stop. We'll slide this up. And then again, I like to hold the front brake for them, pull them forward, and then you can get off the bike.
So sag is basically where the bike sits with just my body weight without movement, basically.
Yeah, basically sag is the point where once your body weight is completely on the bike, on flat ground, where is it sitting?
Yeah.
All right, so April is fully weighted and she has her feet off the ground. And the reason I like to do it this way with the seat down is because she can just put her feet on the ground and unweight herself. So this is a really great way to do it when you're by yourself. So that's pretty much how we're gonna go about measuring sag. Now we'll let April do it on her own and try to get to that 16.5 mm mark.
Okay. So I'm at about 16.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Nice. That was easy.
Yeah. So if I was at 10, where I didn't have enough sag, would I let out some air?
Yeah, exactly. So what you do is let out some air and then just recheck and do that test over and over again until you get to the right.
Maybe like 5 psi at a time?
Yeah, I mean, you could do 5 at a time.
If it's that close. And
Yeah.
then if I had too much sag, I would need to put more air in.
More air in. So we got that set up good.
Okay.
That 0.5 mm, we're not gonna worry about. I mean, if
Yeah.
you're within 1 millimeter or 2, then you're good.
Yeah.
And then now let's go ahead and do the fork.
Okay.
So the way we're gonna measure the fork on both a full suspension and a hardtail is we're gonna put our feet level, or maybe the front pedal slightly down from level. I think you like it with a little bit lower than level, right? It just feels easier.
Yeah.
Okay. So once we do that, we're gonna put our front foot on the pedal. So now that she's in this position, she's gonna apply both of her brakes. And this just kind of keeps you from moving so you can lean forward and shift your weight. So she applied both her brakes and then stand up over the front of the bike. Cool. And now it's settled here. We're gonna just slide the blue O-ring down to the seal and then she's gonna get off the bike and we'll measure. Okay, so you might wonder, why do you like to measure it that way all the time? Like, it seems kind of like a weird way to do it, especially if I ride cross-country mode a lot. So we'll have April jump on the bike real quick and we're gonna get her in a full cross-country mode. Okay, so now bounce a few times. Okay, seated, head up. Okay, so now she's in a mode that she'd be pedaling most often, right? So we're gonna slide this down, and now if she comes forward to get off the bike, so come forward, now you just messed up your sag measurement. So we gotta check that again. So now to do this, you have to have someone come help you and either hold the fork as you get off the bike or get off from the back. So it's just kind of like a more complicated way. So if we do it with this method, which is 1 foot on the front pedal, apply both brakes, lean forward. So now her fork has settled. So now even if she's on her own, then you can still get back and you didn't mess up your sag measurement. So that's really why I like to do it this way, is it's a lot easier to get an accurate measurement, do it on your own, and have it be repeatable. When we do this way, I like to always shoot for 30% sag. That seems to be a really good ballpark number that I've been using for years when it comes to trail riding. Maybe if you're a cross-country rider and you wanted it to be a little stiffer, you could do the same method and try to shoot for 25% sag, and that works just fine too. So there is a little bit of preference in there, riding style preference, all that good stuff, but measuring it at 30% using this method works really good for me, and that's what April's been running too. So does that make sense?
That makes sense.
Okay.
For downhill, would you use 30% as well?
Yeah, I would use 30% on a downhill bike as well, just because when you're on a downhill bike, especially if you're in that attack position, you don't really want it to be sagging too much more than that, because then you just get a lot of you lose a lot of feel with the trail. Because too much sag, you basically get like that kind of riding on a soft couch feel, where you don't have a lot of feel of what's happening on the trail, and too little sag, you lose a lot of traction. So it seems like 30% is a really good ballpark.
Okay.
Now, when you go to measure, always check and make sure that it's not hiding any travel too. Sometimes the fork will kind of settle down a few millimeters on its own. To get the most accurate measurement, you can either hold your fork up or just pull it apart a little bit as you measure. Tools are yours again.
All right.
Okay.
With the shock, we knew how much shock stroke it needed, or it has. How much does the fork have? How do we figure that out? Does it say it?
Okay, so we're trying to figure out how much travel the fork has, and see how right there it has 155.
Mm-hmm.
Usually they'll give you about 5 or so from the top, just so you don't smash anything.
Oh, okay.
So if it says 155 or 153, then that means it's a 150 fork.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
Reset the ring. 1 foot on, both brakes. There we go. Okay.
Okay.
Look at that. We're crushing it.
We're crushing it. That was sick. Okay, so that was your body weight in the rear shock was pretty much perfect, and then half body weight in the fork worked out pretty much perfect too, right?
Yeah.
Nice. Good job.
That's sick. So same thing. If the ring is too high, then that means it's too soft and I need more air in it.
Yes.
And then if the ring was too low, I need less air.
Less air. Yeah, and we did 30% using that method because that is what we found works good for trail riding.
Yeah.
Cool. All right, easy.
Yeah, this is sick.
Okay, so that was way too easy.
Yeah, I was stoked. I didn't know the body weight thing, so that's super helpful.
You use body weight in the rear shock. A lot of the times it's really close. Might not be perfect like we had, but it should be close. And then the fork, like I said too, a lot of times half body weight is a good starting point. Sometimes it'll be quite a bit different. If you have a really small air chamber or a really small fork, you might need to go higher than half body weight, but that's just to give you like a good starting point so you're not totally, struggling. Yeah. So the method we're following today is SSRC. And we just got the two S's out of the way, which is sag and spring rate. Now we're gonna tackle the RC part, and that's rebound and compression. We're gonna focus on the rear shock first, and then we're gonna talk about the fork. When setting up a rear shock, the easiest way and the most consistent way I've found to get a good setting is actually by using a curb. So we'll go over, we're gonna find a curb, and then we'll kind of talk a little bit more about rebound. Ready? Yeah. Cool. So we have our super scientific curb here, and the way we're gonna do this is April is gonna ride at like a nice jogging speed, stay seated, and we're gonna watch when she goes off the curb, her rear shock's gonna compress, and then we want it to rebound fully and then settle at sag. So a lot of times what I'll see people have their rebound too fast, and when they compress, it'll just start bouncing 1 or 2 times. That's a sign that your rebound's a little too fast, and if it's too slow, it'll compress and then settle at sag and not go to full extension. So that's what we're gonna look for when we're coming off the curb. Another thing you can do is you can look up your manufacturer's air pressure to rebound chart. And the reason they have a chart like that is because your rebound is directly related to how much pressure you have in your shock or in your fork. And the more pressure you have, the more you're gonna need to restrict the rebound. The less pressure you have, the more open you'll need the rebound. So if you look at one of those charts and it says you need 5 clicks or 6 clicks, they're always measuring from fully closed. So that's one point of confusion I see a lot of people kind of struggle with. We've actually had a few emails where people said, hey, I don't understand why I need to run less rebound when I'm heavier, because it says that if I was lighter, I need to run 6 clicks of rebound, and if I'm heavier, I need to run 2. But they're measuring from fully closed, so 2 clicks is actually slower than 6 clicks, which can be really confusing for a lot of people. And fully closed means fully restricted. So if you go righty-tighty and you close the circuit, that's gonna be the most restricted. If you turn lefty-loosey or counterclockwise, that opens the circuit and you get the most flow. If for some reason you can't find one of those charts and you're just really struggling to get to like an initial setting, you can kind of ballpark it. A lot of times manufacturers try to make it so 150 to 180 pound rider is right in the middle of the range. So if I'm 180 pounds, I would kind of start right in that midway point. And then for April, she'll probably start more towards fully open. So maybe in between middle and fully open. So does that make sense? Yeah. Okay, cool. But with that being said, now we're gonna have April set up her rebound and do that quick test, and then we'll go over the fork as well.
Okay. And so I'm gonna try it fully closed so we can see what that looks like, and then we'll try it at the quarter setting for my weight.
Okay. All right, April's coming in at a nice jogging speed, and we're gonna watch and see if her shock is too slow. How'd that feel?
Like a sack of potatoes.
Yeah. The reason we're going to try to get it to just go compress, extend, and settle is that basically gives you the ability for your wheel to fall into the holes, so you still would track the ground, but it doesn't make it so you're just bouncing the whole way.
Okay. Lefty-loosey.
Yeah, lefty-loosey.
Ooh, it like went up.
Okay. All right, so you're 7 from closed, aka 3 from open.
Okay.
And ready to go. Let's try that. All right, this time should be pretty much perfect.
Felt like a firm water balloon.
Could you feel a difference?
Yeah, it felt good.
Okay, cool. All right, sweet. So that is how you pretty much set up your rear shock.
Nice.
Yeah. So that first time was too slow and she just went boom and stuck. And then last time she went compress, rebound, settle. All right, so now that April got her rear shock set up using the curb method, we're gonna go ahead and talk about how to set up the fork. One of the most common ways that I see this done is using a test where they basically, you press down on your fork and see if the tire bounces off the ground a little bit, like this, standing next to the bike. For me personally, I've had a lot of trouble over the years doing this and getting it to work with other people. But one thing we found that works pretty well is if you ride around in flat ground and you do one good hard bounce into your suspension, so at least 50% of your suspension travel is used during that bounce. If your tire bounces off the ground, your rebound's too fast. When we do this test, we always start from all the way open and then we work our way closed until the tire stays on the ground, because that'll give you a really good baseline for your rebound setting. Then you'll kind of fine tune it out on the trail. For a rebound, especially in the fork, if you're riding through a rough section and you feel like your front end keeps getting lower and kind of more stiff, then that means that the fork is packing down or just getting lower and lower and lower. It's not able to return to full travel. So that means your rebound's too slow. If you're going through like a rock garden or a rough section, maybe it's really rooty, and you feel your front end bounce off of things and kind of get deflected, that means it's a little too fast. So we'll get a good baseline setting here. It'll work on both a hardtail and a full suspension bike, and then on the trail we can kind of fine tune it from there. So we'll talk about that a little bit more in a second, but right now April's gonna grab her bike and we're gonna set up her fork. Ready?
Yeah.
Cool. How you feeling?
Good.
Good?
Yeah, this is going great.
You learning stuff?
Yeah.
Cool. All right, so just as an example or a test, what we're gonna do is we're gonna take your fork, go all the way slow, and then go all the way fast, and then we'll kind of set it.
And I'm having a...
So another thing that I really forgot to do is that blue knobs are compression usually, red knobs are rebound.
Okay.
So red
Sick.
knob here, rebound, blue knob compression, blue knob compression, red knob rebound.
Oh, okay. So I'm having a moment still. Slow is open or closed? Slow is all the way closed.
Yeah, you did it. Righty tighty.
Got it.
So try to give it like a good bounce. Yeah, feel how awkward that feels?
Yeah.
All right, so now we'll try full open. Okay, and then instead of doing a lot of little bounces, let's try one good big bounce.
Okay. Oh, like the tire comes off the ground.
Yeah, you feel that?
Yeah.
The reason that I said to do one big bounce versus a bunch of little bounces is you'll really feel your rebound when your fork gets about halfway. So that's when you can really see if it's too fast or too slow. So when you did that one big bounce, what happened?
My tire came off the ground.
Yeah, so that's not good.
Yeah, that's scary.
Yeah, so let's go ahead, and there's 24 clicks of rebound on this fork. So
12 is mid.
12 is mid.
So 6 is where I want to be from fully open. 18.
From closed. Okay, so now you are at what?
18 from closed.
Yeah, and that ends up being 6 from open, basically.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, let's do one big bounce and see what happens this time. Okay, how's that feel?
Good.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Can you tell a big difference?
Uh-huh. Yeah, it feels like traction and equal.
Cool. Sweet. How are you feeling so far?
Pretty good. This is way easier than I thought.
Yeah, you're doing good. And we started out, like we said at the very start, this bike was not set up at all. And then it's been a little bit because we're filming, but usually you can do this process if you're not filming in about 10 minutes and get your bike really good baseline setup. So the last thing in the SSRC We did sag, spring rate, rebound, and now we'll talk about compression. The hard thing with compression though is there's not really a great test for it. Like on the rebound, we have a few different ways to test that. On the sag, you just measure it. So it's really measurable and you can actually like tell people, yes, this is good or not. With compression, there's a lot more preference involved. And so I think the way we'll do this is just kind of talk about what you'll feel on the trail and when you might want to add it or take it out. You'll basically see two types of compression. You'll have low speed compression and high speed compression. A good way to think about it is your low speed compression is going to isolate the rider from the bike a little bit. So when you're pedaling, if your pedal input is making the bike bob, then adding a little bit of low speed compression will kind of settle that down. Same with on the fork. If you hit the brakes and your body weight shifts forward and makes the fork compress too much, if you add a little bit of low speed compression, that'll help the fork resist that and it'll kind of settle it. So a good way to think about low speed compression is it kind of acts as a platform to where when you move around on the bike, it's not just going to be so free. It just kind of restricts it a little bit. So when you move a bit, it's not going like this. It's kind of, you move forward, it slowly settles. You move back, it slowly settles. When you pedal, it really stabilizes it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Cool. All right, so with low speed, I always recommend checking a manufacturer chart as well, just to get your kind of baseline setting. So I personally like to run it about in between halfway and fully open most of the time, and then you can kind of fine tune it from there. But always check with your manufacturer just to be sure. Then on the other side, high speed compression is basically when you're riding and there's maybe a square edge hole, like a braking bump or a rock that you're coming into, and your bike experiences really high speed impact. So if you ever have been like riding into a corner and you hit a braking bump and you feel like your wrists get a little bit of a jar, then that is generally caused from high speed compression. So I like to run my high speed compression as open as I possibly can. The only time I'll add high speed compression is if I'm riding and I feel like when I hit those things, my fork gets too low and it makes me want to kind of go over the bars. So if say I'm coming through a rock section and I hit a really big bump and it blows through the travel too quickly, then I'll add high speed. Okay. But generally it's better to have less high speed so your fork is more free and your rear shock is more free.
And then, so I see on my compression, it just goes from 1 to 5.
Yeah.
And so same thing, left and right is same for open and close.
Yeah, exactly. So same thing as rebound. Like anytime you're talking about damping, damping is basically just the control of the oil. We're talking about that. We're gonna say righty-tighty or clockwise is closing and restricting everything. Lefty-loosey is opening or letting more oil flow, so it's more free.
Cool.
So a lot of times if you have a fork, like my fork has 1 position, 2 position, 3 position, a lot of times they'll kind of break that down. So all the way left is open for descending. In the middle is more of like meandering through trails. And then all the way right is maybe I'm climbing up a fire road or commuting through town. So you kind of have that climb, trail, descend feature there. So that's a good way to think about that. But if you are someone who has that little fine tune adjustment knob like her fork does, then what I like to do is go out on the trail. If you feel like you're braking and you're shifting too far forward, so you notice yourself really getting over the front of the bike, add a little bit of low speed compression. And then if you're feeling like when you're coming through a really kind of light, rooty section or something with a lot of little tiny bumps and it feels a little bit harsh, then maybe try backing the compression open a little bit. That'll make it flow more freely and give you a little bit better traction. So one thing to note though, like talking about all of the suspension stuff today, one thing you cannot understate is how important tire pressure is. So we could do this whole entire process and get our suspension just perfect, but if your tire pressure is too high, your bike's gonna feel harsh. If your tire pressure is too low, your bike is gonna feel uncontrolled and really squirmy. So I'll put a link in the description to like a little tire pressure calculator. Again, that just gets you to a ballpark, but just be aware if you are having issues. First thing I always do is I check someone's tire pressure. That'll basically be a huge thing. A lot of times they'll be like, man, my bike is so harsh. And then they have 45 PSI in their tires. And a lot of times if they're like, oh, it feels so wallowy and it's really hard to control, they have like 10 or 15 PSI. So.
And we check our tire pressure every ride.
Yeah, we usually try to check our tire pressure every ride, either with a floor pump or I have a little tiny digital gauge that I'll put on the tire and just check it. So I think it's really important. If you always, you know, you need a baseline, because then once you have a baseline, you can figure out if something's going wrong or going well. So then you can adjust it. But if you're always just searching and you don't have those numbers figured out, it's really hard. To go with that too, one thing that really helps me is have it in my phone, like a notes app or something, and I'll just go through and write down all the information that we found out today. So all the clicks and the settings, and then later on you can kind of troubleshoot, and it makes life a lot easier. All right, before we go, I just wanted to talk about a couple little troubleshooting things that come up really often is volume spacers. And I see that a lot. People aren't sure whether to add or take out volume spacers and when to do it. My kind of rule of thumb and a thing that will help you along the way is if you set up your bike to the correct sag, you'll always use that as your baseline. Then from there, if you feel like you're riding and you're always bottoming out, that usually is a sign you'll need to add volume spacers. On the other side, if you have the right sag and you can't get enough travel, then you'll want to take out volume spacers. So I see that a lot with people's forks where they'll have a few inches remaining always, and that's because the forks ship with the volume spacers installed a lot of times. As you're trying to figure out your bike, a really good habit to have is to reset your rings, the O-ring on the fork or shock before you go ride. That way you can kind of see how much travel you're using consistently. It's pretty normal and actually good to bottom out 1 or 2 times a ride. And by bottom out, I mean that the ring will come almost all the way to the top of the fork or all the way to the bottom of the shock. That's totally normal, and that's actually a good thing. But if you're someone who has it like that and you're never getting full travel, that means you probably want to take some volume spacers out. And on the opposite side, if you're someone who is just constantly bottoming out and you're getting a lot of harshness, that's a sign you want to add a few volume spacers. So yeah, that's kind of the most common things that I see come up is volume spacers. But if you follow this process today of the SSRC, then you'll get a really good baseline setting. And like we showed in that test with April, it can help you become a way better, more confident, faster rider. And it's a free way to do it. All right, April, so what do you think today?
It was really surprising how easy this was for me and how quick it is. And I'm just really excited that I can tell the difference in how the suspension feels, because that's what I was most worried about, or what kept me from doing it before is that I was scared I wouldn't be able to tell, but it was really easy.
Cool. All right, sweet. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. And it's one of those videos where it's so much information, but the goal of it is really to make it so you feel like you could go and try to set up your bike yourself and get a better ride. You know, when we did that first video, April's so used to her bike being set up well, and when we set it up poorly, she was like, you know, it was crazy, right?
Yeah, it was very eye-opening and made me really appreciate having a good setup bike.
Yeah, so that was kind of the goal in this video, was to help you guys achieve a similar setup. So definitely let us know if you have any questions or comments, and we'll try to get to them as soon as we can. And thanks for everything. Thanks for watching, and we really appreciate you guys, and we'll see you next time.
Yeah, thank you.
See you later.